The sun hadn't come up yet. The land was gray and cold, and Caleb Wren was already awake. He sat at the edge of his porch with a blanket over his shoulders, one boot on, the other in his hand. His back ached. He blamed the cot inside. It sagged worse each year, but deep down he knew it was the cold mornings that did it, and the leg that hadn't healed right since Antietam. 20 years, and it still swelled in the rain. He'd fed the chickens before dawn, then checked the smokehouse. He didn't like breaking routine. A man living alone didn't have much else to cling to. He was halfway to the barn with a feed bucket when he saw the door cracked open. He hadn't left it that way. He set the bucket down, quiet. The barn smelled of hay, horses, and something else, people. He walked in slow, his limp more obvious when he moved without thinking. He didn't carry a rifle. Not yet. Just stood near the stall and looked. They were all asleep in the hay. A woman, early 30s maybe, curled around an infant wrapped in a faded quilt. Her clothes were torn in places, the sleeves rolled up too high for the cold. Her eyes were shut but sunken, like she hadn't rested in days. Beside her lay a girl, 8 or 9 years old, knees to her chest. On the opposite side were two boys, one 5 or 6, the other 10, maybe 11. The older one had one arm across the younger's chest and the other around a crooked stick held like a weapon. Caleb didn't speak, didn't step forward. He just watched. The older boy woke first. His eyes snapped open, narrowed immediately, and locked on Caleb's face. His hand tightened around the stick. Caleb didn't flinch. The woman stirred next. She blinked up at the stranger, then quickly shifted to shield the baby with her body. She didn't scream, didn't beg. "We'll be gone by morning," she said, voice flat. "I know this ain't our place." Caleb said nothing. The baby made a faint noise, weak, struggling to breathe. "You're on my land," he said evenly. "I know." The girl shifted in her sleep and mumbled something. Her feet were bare. Her dress was thin and torn near the hem. The woman sat up straighter. "We were heading west. My husband died 3 weeks ago. Fever took him outside Santa Rosa. I kept the children moving, but the wagon broke down 2 days back. We walked till we couldn't." Caleb looked at the children. "You feed him. Last of the cornmeal yesterday. They ain't eaten today." He nodded once and walked out. The boy's grip didn't relax until he was gone. 10 minutes later, the barn door creaked open again. He came back with a kettle of warm water and a cloth sack of bread and dried meat. He placed them near the stall, not too close, then straightened. The children stirred at the smell of food. The woman reached for the sack, slow, careful not to appear greedy. "I don't want charity," she said. "You'll get heat and food till I say otherwise," Caleb replied. "That baby won't survive the cold night again." He turned and left. Caleb Wren had never been a generous man, not because he was cruel, but because he didn't trust need. Too many years watching people lose what they loved. Too many years learning that giving too much gets you nothing but pain. He lived alone on the same land he'd worked since before the war. His brothers had died in uniform. He came back half a man, with a bad leg and a silence in him that never fully left. His days were long. His nights were longer. No wife. No children. He never talked about why. He didn't go to town often. And when he did, he didn't stay long. But he didn't sleep that night. Not because of the cold, but because he kept thinking about that baby's wheezing breath. In the morning, Martha Elkins didn't wait to be told. She gathered the children, lined them up by the barn wall, and scrubbed their faces with a wet rag she'd boiled over a small flame. The infant was quiet, but breathing better. The older boy, Toby, stood guard, shoulders back, watching Caleb with suspicion. The woman herself, Martha, was focused, collected, but not hardened. She was thin. Her dress hung off her like it once fit and hadn't in months. Her eyes were red but dry. Caleb walked past them to the trough. Didn't say anything until she joined him. "You said you were heading west," he said. "To Los Lunas. My brother's there. Where he was 2 years ago. What's in your wagon?" "Blankets. Sewing tools. Half a wheel. That's all we've got." Caleb nodded. "You gonna turn us out?" she asked. "No." She waited. When he said nothing else, she nodded once and walked back to tend to her children. By sundown, things had shifted. Toby helped Caleb move feed from the shed to the barn without being asked. The little girl, Sadie, stood near the chicken coop with a soft look on her face, watching Caleb work like she'd never seen a man lift hay before. Benji, the youngest boy, tried to chase the mule and got a warning kick for his trouble. Martha boiled some leftover beans on the small fire outside the barn. Caleb handed her a pot without a word. She accepted it the same way. That night, when he walked out to check the sky before sleep, he found his boots cleaned and drying by the porch steps. She had scrubbed them, didn't say anything about it, just did it. He looked at them, then at the barn, then went inside and left the door unlatched. He lay awake for a while, staring at the ceiling beams above his bed. He didn't know what to call what he felt. Maybe duty, maybe guilt, maybe just the ache of watching people who didn't deserve it be broken by bad luck. All he knew was they weren't going anywhere. Not yet. And he didn't want them to. The morning broke colder than the day before. Pale frost lined the edges of the barn door, and the sky hung heavy with a low ceiling of gray. Caleb Wren stirred early, just as the first dim light pushed through the window cracks. He didn't sleep well, not from noise, but from the weight in his chest that hadn't been there for years. He pulled on his boots, still damp from where they'd been scrubbed, and stepped outside. The air bit through his shirt, but he moved anyway, limping slow toward the barn, unsure if they'd still be there. They were. Martha was already up, kneeling near the fire pit she'd built just outside the door. The baby lay swaddled in a basket beside her, cheeks pink from the heat, not fever. Toby helped her stir the fire, his small hands red from cold, but working with purpose. Sadie was gathering kindling under Caleb's old cedar. Benji sat on the stoop, chewing a piece of dried biscuit like it was steak, eyes following Caleb's every move. No one said good morning, not even a nod, but they were alive and working. Martha didn't look at him when she spoke. Emma's breathing easier. That kettle water helped. She drank near a whole cup. Caleb stepped past her, took the empty pail without comment, and walked to the pump. He didn't say he was glad. He didn't ask about the baby's name, but he'd remembered it anyway. He filled the bucket, splashing cold water on his hand. He dried it against his trousers, slow and stiff, then carried it back to her side. Need anything else? She looked at him now, straight, eyes calm, clear. What are you a skin, Mr. Wren? He didn't answer right away. He watched Benji toss a stick toward the dog that didn't exist and shake his head. You ain't looking to beg, he said finally. No, sir. We'll move along soon. I know we can't stay. Caleb frowned. Did I say that? She hesitated. No. He nodded, then pointed with his chin toward the field. If that boy of yours wants work, Fence has got a lean on the west side. Could use another set of hands. Martha turned her head toward Toby, who stood straight like he'd been caught listening. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just looked at Caleb again and said, We'll pull our weight while we're here. That was enough. By noon, Caleb and Toby were halfway down the back line of the property, hammering replacement slats into cracked posts. Toby didn't speak much, which suited Caleb fine. He moved well for a boy, focused, balanced, and careful not to waste motion. Caleb handed him nails without asking. The boy learned fast, measured twice, hit straight. They worked in silence until the sun was overhead. Toby finally broke it. Is this all yours? He asked. Caleb wiped sweat off his neck. Yup, always been yours. Belonged to my father, then to me. Toby nodded. It's big. It's quiet. Another silence. Then, after a beat, the boy said, I could fix the coop too. Hinge is busted on the far side. Caleb grunted. You noticed that, did you? Toby shrugged, but he looked proud. Back at the barn, Martha was sorting through a canvas bag, counting out what was left of their supplies. One crack spoon, a button with no thread, a strip of cloth she'd torn off her own petticoat to use as a baby wrap. She laid each thing out like it mattered, because it did. Sadie sat beside her, humming quietly under her breath, tracing shapes in the dust. Benji had fallen asleep, curled up next to the mule's flank, which hadn't kicked once. Even the animals seemed to understand something different was happening here. Caleb returned just before sundown. He walked up with a bundle of firewood under one arm, a tin box under the other. He set it on the stoop. You know how to sew, right? Martha looked at him, then opened the box. Inside, spools of thread, a pair of shears, needles, patches of canvas, and a thimble. She didn't ask where he'd gotten them. She didn't thank him either. She just stared at the tools for a long moment, then closed the lid gently and said, "I'll earn it." "I ain't keeping tally," Caleb replied. "You should," she said. That night, they ate cornbread and beans. Not much, but enough. Caleb sat on the porch after dark, same as always. The chair creaked beneath his weight, and he watched the moon rise with a blank look. He thought about how quiet the land used to be, how comfortable it had become to be left alone, how the silence used to feel like peace. But now it felt flat, stale. Behind him, the faint sound of Martha's voice floated from the barn, soft, steady, reading something to the children in a whisper. The words were hard to make out, but the tone was warm, motherly, safe. Then came a smaller voice. "Benji, maybe you're Sadie." Then a little laughter. Caleb turned his eyes back to the stars. What the story hadn't told yet, the part no one in town knew, the part Caleb never spoke, was that he once had a younger sister. She died when she was Sadie's age. Fever, same as Emma might have caught. He remembered the sound of his mother crying through the cabin walls. He remembered the silence afterward, the way the house never sounded full again. He didn't like children much, or at least that's what he always told himself. But the way Benji had curled up next to the mule, the way Sadie followed him in silence, watching everything, the way Toby worked without complaint, they weren't a burden. They were doing what Caleb understood best, surviving. And something in his chest, buried deep for a long time, shifted just a little. He stood up from a chair and stepped back into the house. Before he closed the door, he reached for the lantern hanging by the beam, and this time he left it lit. The days had begun to settle into a rhythm, though no one spoke of staying. Not Martha, not Caleb, but neither did anyone mention leaving. Mornings were colder now. The baby, Emma, had stopped wheezing but still coughed in her sleep. Martha kept her wrapped close, especially at night, and checked her temperature with the back of her hand. She didn't ask Caleb for medicine. She figured if he had any, he would have offered. She also figured he didn't. Most folks didn't. That morning, Caleb stepped into the barn without knocking. The family had begun to move inside his space like ghosts, quiet, careful, never overstepping. Still, he waited by the door. "I'm heading to town," he said. Martha looked up from a pot of oats. She stirred slower. "You need something?" she asked. He hesitated. "You any good at talking to folk?" "Depends who's asking." His jaw ticked. "They'll talk if you walk in beside me. Otherwise, they'll ask questions. About you. About me." She nodded, understood. So, for the first time since her husband died, Martha Elkins stepped into town with a man beside her. The ride-in was silent. She sat beside Caleb on the wagon bench, Emma held tight in her arms, wrapped in 2 blankets and the patched shawl Sadie had found in Caleb's trunk. Caleb didn't explain why he kept it. She didn't ask. As they passed through the town's main road, folks stared. Not with kindness. Not with cruelty either. Just the way people did when something new came along they hadn't approved. The general store owner, Mr. Pike, leaned forward when they entered. "Caleb," he greeted plainly. "Need milk," Caleb replied. "And flour. Salt." Pike's eyes flicked to Martha. She held the baby firm, chin up, back straight. She didn't smile, didn't shrink. "She yours?" Pike asked bluntly. Caleb looked at him like he hadn't spoken English. "She's with me," he said, then added, "Ain't that enough?" Pike grunted and moved to the back to fetch what was needed. Martha's voice was low. "They think we're together. They think worse when they don't know what they're looking at." She glanced sideways at him. "And what are they looking at?" He didn't answer, just paid the coins and handed her the sack. They stopped by the blacksmith's after to trade for a new handle for Caleb's spade. Then past the chapel, where old Mrs. Larkin stood on the steps sweeping dust that wouldn't stay gone. She squinted when she saw Martha. "She'll tell the whole county," Martha muttered. Caleb didn't look back. "Let her." They returned home with the supplies before sundown. The children rushed out of the barn to meet them. Sadie held up a broken doll she'd found buried in one of the crates. Benji ran up and pointed at the candy in Martha's hand like it was gold. That night, after the children were fed and the lantern hung low, Caleb sat on the porch again. Martha stood beside him, arms folded tight. Why'd you take us in? He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, didn't mean to. She nodded slowly. Thought so. I just didn't send you away. That's not the same. Caleb shifted in his chair. Your boy, Toby, he sees things. Fence work, coop hinge, loose nail on the stall door. He works hard. Don't ask for nothing. She smiled faintly. He's had to grow up too fast. He nodded. Reminded me of someone. Your own son? No, I never had one. A pause. I had a younger brother. Died before I came back from the war. I was supposed to take care of him. Martha didn't speak. Just stood there. After a while, she sat beside him on the top step. Not close. Not touching. But beside him. Emma's getting better, she said softly. Caleb gave a small nod. She smiles now. First time since her father died. He didn't say anything. But when he got up to head inside, he left the door open behind him. And when he came back out with a second chair and set it beside his own, he didn't offer it with words. Just sat back down, leaned forward on his knees, and waited for her to fill the quiet. She didn't, but she stayed. The next morning, Toby followed Caleb to the field again. This time, Sadie came too, holding a basket for collecting stones. Caleb didn't object. He handed her gloves without a word. She grinned. Benji stayed behind, but he sat by the kitchen door, talking to himself and drawing pictures in the dirt with a twig. Inside, Martha swept the main room of the house. Not the barn. Caleb's house. She dusted shelves she hadn't been asked to clean. Organized tools. Boiled water. Not because she was told, but because it was something to do, and her hands didn't know how to be idle. That afternoon, when the fence line was finished, Toby turned to Caleb and asked, You ever think about going somewhere else? Starting fresh. Caleb stared across the field. I used to, and now. He didn't look at the boy. Just said, Now I just keep the roof from fouling in. That night, after the children were asleep, Martha folded Caleb's mended shirts into a crate she'd turned into a dresser. She noticed the way he left the lantern burning a little longer, the way he filled the coffee pot without being asked, the way he looked toward the barn at night without stepping inside. And she began to realize something quietly, just as Caleb had. They weren't guests anymore. They were part of the land now, like the mule, like the dust, like the silence. It hadn't been decided with words. It had happened through staying. The days turned warmer, the frost lifting from the ground and giving way to dry, cracked dirt and long trails of dust that trailed behind boots and wagon wheels. Caleb Wren's farm, once lifeless and too quiet for its own good, now rang with sound. Hammers tapping, children's feet pounding through loose soil, a baby's soft cough, laughter that came in bursts like it had to be coaxed out. Still, no one called a home, not out loud. That morning, Martha stood near the corral with her sleeves rolled and her arms crossed. She watched as Toby helped Caleb stack lumber for a new shed wall. The boy had grown leaner, stronger, his steps more sure of themselves. His voice, too, had changed, less guarded, more steady when he spoke. Caleb listened to him now like he would a ranch hand. No praise, but no correction either. They'd fallen into a rhythm. Martha turned her eyes toward the distant hills. That direction still pulled at her sometimes. Los Lunas, where her brother might be, where she was supposed to end up. But each day that passed, she walked farther from that idea. Inside the house, Sadie sat by the window, sewing buttons onto a shirt Caleb had torn last week. Benji was outside, dragging a wooden bucket behind him with serious purpose. Emma had stopped coughing altogether. Caleb entered from the porch and looked around his own living room, now cluttered with boots not his, thread on the table, a basket of dried apples by the hearth that someone else had gathered. He stood still for a moment, absorbing it all. Then came the knock. It was quick, too quick to be neighborly. Caleb opened the door slowly. Two men stood outside, Sheriff Alden and Everett Pike, the banker. Alden gave a polite nod. Mornin', Caleb. Sheriff. Everett didn't wait. You got squatters on your land, Wren. Caleb's expression didn't shift. I got a family keeping warm. You don't get to adopt strays just 'cause you've got extra space, Everett snapped. Woman's wagons still broken and sitting on public trail land. I've had complaints. Caleb stepped onto the porch and let the door close behind him. They're not hurting anyone. Maybe not yet, Everett said. But you think folks ain't talking? Man like you, living alone all these years, now talking a woman and her children? Ain't proper. Ain't right. Alden cleared his throat. It's not illegal, Everett. It's not decent either. Caleb didn't raise his voice. Didn't budge. You're here to take a wagon? Or start a rumor? Everett's lips thinned. Just letting you know we're watching. They rode off. That night, Caleb didn't sit on the porch. He sat inside instead, sharpening his knife at the table, shoulders hunched slightly, eyes on the same spot in the wood over and over. Martha stood by the hearth, drying a pan. You knew they'd come, she said. I figured it was coming. You think they'll push it? They'll try. She turned to him. We can go. Caleb didn't look up. And go where? Las Lunas. My brother. You haven't heard from him in 2 years. She didn't answer. Caleb finally looked up, set the knife down. They're not worried about you. They're worried what it means if you stay. If I let you stay. Martha's voice dropped. And what does it mean? He stared at her a long time. Then quietly, I don't know yet. That hurt. She didn't show it, but it did. Not because he owed her anything, but because part of her had hoped, maybe even needed, him to say something else. He stood and walked to the door. Outside, the barn lantern was still burning. The next morning, Caleb took the wagon into town alone. He passed Mrs. Larkin, who didn't wave. At the general store, Mr. Pike didn't say much. Just handed him salt and nails and muttered about hard winters. As he turned to leave, Caleb paused. You think I'm doing something wrong? He asked, quiet. Pike looked up, surprised. No, but folks out here, when things change, they don't say it's good or bad. They just call it dangerous. Caleb didn't respond. He left with the supplies. Back home, he found the children tending to the garden patch behind the house. Martha had dug out old seed packets from the bottom of his cabinet and started clearing the land, turning over dirt with the shovel he hadn't used in years. She looked up as he approached. You go alone, she said. You didn't tell me you were leaving to... You didn't ask. She turned back to the soil. I'm not looking to be your burden, Caleb. You're not. I don't need a savior. I'm not trying to be one. She stood then, brush of dirt on her apron, her hands shaking slightly despite the strength in her voice. Then what are you trying to be? He looked at her for a long time, like he wanted to answer but didn't know how without getting it wrong. I'm just trying to hold what I can, he said finally, and maybe not lose it. That was the most honest thing he'd said since she'd arrived. She nodded once and said nothing more. That night, Sadie fell asleep in the corner of Caleb's living room, curled under his old army coat. Benji started calling the barn dog Scout, and Emma, for the first time, reached for Caleb's hand. He took it, gently, and didn't let go until she did. The weather turned sharp overnight. By morning, the wind howled over the flatland like it had something to prove. Dust flew in sheets across the field, and the animals huddled in corners of the barn, restless and uneasy. Caleb Wren stood near the front window, arms crossed, watching the fence line disappear behind a curtain of grit. He didn't like how the sky looked, thick with orange and gray, two still beneath the roar. Dust storms didn't care whose land they crossed, and this one was moving fast. Behind him, Martha wrapped Emma tighter in a quilt and tied a second scarf around her own hair. She moved with steady urgency, not panic. Toby was already bringing in buckets. Sadie and Benji dragged crates toward the wall inside, coughing with each step. We'll keep to the stone room, Martha said firmly. Caleb didn't argue. His storm shelter, built into the side of the hill behind the barn, hadn't been used in over a decade. He'd nearly forgotten it was there. Now it might be the only thing that kept them all breathing. He pulled open the back door, the wind slamming it hard against the frame. Move quick, he barked. Cover your faces. Keep hold of the children. No one hesitated. Inside the shelter, the air was stale but still. The walls were made of packed stone and cedar. It wasn't much, an old oil lamp, a few crates of dry goods, and a cot. But it would do. Caleb shut the door behind them, sealing the latch tight. Then he sat on a crate near the back wall, wiping grit from his eyes, listening to the wind scream above them. Emma whimpered in Martha's arms. Benji clung to Sadie, his face buried in her dress. Toby sat across from Caleb, watching the older man the way a boy watches someone who's done this before. waiting to see if he should be scared or calm. "We'll be all right," Caleb said low. "Just a bad wind. Won't last." But it did. Hours passed. The sound above didn't soften. The oil lamp flickered, casting shadows across the rough walls. At one point, Martha leaned back against the cot, Emma asleep on her chest, and closed her eyes. "You ever have to ride out one of these before?" she asked without looking up. Caleb nodded. "Once. With my father. Back when I was about Toby's age. Took shingles clean off the house." "What did you do?" "Listened to him pray, mostly. Then we rebuilt what blew away." Martha gave a quiet laugh. "Sound about right." Toby shifted beside him. "You think the coop's gone?" "Maybe. But the mule's still smarter than most people. He'll be fine." Sadie, still holding Benji's hand, looked up. "Will our wagon be there?" Caleb didn't answer right away. "No," Martha said gently. "It's old. We knew it wouldn't last." Sadie's eyes lowered, but she didn't cry. After a while, Caleb stood and checked the latch again. The door hadn't budged. That was something. Then he looked back at them. At all of them. His house, now inside the shelter. His floors scattered with blankets, with scraped-up boots, with quiet children who didn't belong to him, but somehow did now. He cleared his throat. "We'll wait another hour. Then check the barn." Martha looked up at him, eyes meeting his. "You don't have to hold all of it alone, Caleb." "I know," he said, but the words sat strange in his mouth. Unused. When the storm finally died, it left the sky bruised and the land broken. The porch roof was half torn, one of the chicken coops flattened. Dust covered everything in a thick, choking layer. But the house stood. So did the barn. The animals were skittish, but alive. The wagon, though, what was left of it, lay turned and cracked near the edge of the fence line. The wheel had snapped clean. The canvas was shredded. Benji looked at it like it was a friend that had died. Martha didn't say anything, just picked up what few things were still inside. A tin cup, a pair of baby socks, a bent horseshoe. Caleb watched her. He didn't offer words. There weren't any that would matter. That evening, the family sat inside the house instead of the barn. No one asked. They just did. Martha swept dust from the corners while Caleb nailed a tarp across the broken window. Sadie helped cook. Toby scrubbed grit from the porch. Benji fell asleep against Caleb's leg with Emma curled in his arms. And when the sheriff returned the next day, riding slow with 2 deputies behind him, he didn't come with papers or threats. He stepped off his horse and looked at Caleb. "Word is you're housing folks inside now." Caleb stared at him. "You got a law against that?" The sheriff shook his head. "No, sir. Just folks wondering if this place turned into a mission overnight." "It didn't," Caleb said flat. The sheriff looked at Martha, then the children standing nearby. He tipped his hat. "Then I guess it's just a home." He turned, mounted up, and rode off. Caleb watched him leave, then turned and looked at Martha. She didn't smile, but her shoulders lowered just slightly. "We're not going anywhere," she said. He didn't nod, didn't speak, but he stepped aside and held the door open. And she walked in. The days after the storm were quiet. Not the empty kind of quiet that used to hang around Caleb's home like dust in the corners, but a full, living kind. The kind made of voices in the kitchen, the scrape of boots across wooden floors, the soft weight of a baby's breath rising from a cot. The land had taken a beating, but it wasn't dead. The fence needed repair. One of the troughs had split. The well's crank stuck, but none of it felt insurmountable. There were hands now, small ones, steady ones, ones that didn't ask questions but did the work. Caleb was in the field that morning, checking on the edge posts, when Toby came up behind him holding a hammer and a crooked smile. "You missed one," the boy said. Caleb glanced down the row. He had. He didn't say anything, just held out his hand. Toby gave him the hammer. They worked side by side, Caleb slowing just a little to let the boy keep pace. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was useful, solid. At one point, Toby paused. "You fight in the war?" Caleb nodded once. "Yeah. My pa wanted to. Got turned down for his heart. He was lucky then." Toby didn't answer for a while. Just drove a nail into a fresh plank. "When he died, I was the one had to bury him. My ma wouldn't let me see him after. Said it was better to remember his voice." Caleb stopped hammering. He looked at the boy. "You remember it?" "Sometimes." He paused. "You remember your brothers?" Caleb's jaw tightened. Not anymore. They didn't speak for a while after that. But when they finished, Caleb clapped Toby's shoulder before heading back. He'd never done that before. Inside, the kitchen smelled of cornmeal and something warm. Martha had baked real bread, not just fried scraps. She didn't announce it. She just left it cooling on the sill like it belonged there. Sadie and Benji were playing cards on the floor, arguing softly over the rules. Emma was asleep in the wooden crib Caleb had dragged out of the loft 2 nights earlier, then cleaned and patched with his own hands. He hadn't built it for her. He wasn't sure who it had originally been meant for, but it fit now. Martha looked over her shoulder when he entered. "You look tired." "I'm old." She smirked. "You're stubborn." He sat slowly at the table. "They talk less now," he said, meaning the children. She nodded. "They feel safe." "That new to them?" "Yes." They sat a while. The only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock, the wind shifting the curtains slightly. "I got a letter," she said suddenly. He looked up. "My brother. I wrote weeks ago, didn't think it'd reach. But it did. He's still in Los Lunas. Runs a smithy now. You gonna go?" She didn't answer right away. "He says he can take us in. Says he has space. Said he was sorry about Tom." Caleb waited. "But he doesn't know the children anymore," she added. "They don't know him either. You think he'd be good to them?" "He'd try, but it'd be starting over again. And I don't think they have another start left in them." Caleb's eyes dropped to his calloused hands on the table. "And you?" he asked. She folded her apron slowly. "I used to think survival was about moving. Now I think maybe it's about staying." Caleb looked at her for a long time. The kitchen around them was dim with the setting sun. Her face was softer in that light, but not weak. She looked like someone who had endured enough to recognize peace when it showed up, wearing old boots and quiet manners. "I ain't asked you to stay," he said. "You didn't have to." That evening, after supper, Caleb stepped outside to check the animals. He paused at the barn, resting his hand on the doorframe, listening to the cluck of hens and the shifting hooves of the mule. From inside the house came the sound of Sadie's humming, Benji's giggle, and the steady creak of the floorboards under Martha's step. He'd heard that house creak for years. It had never sounded like a home before. He walked back in, pulled off his coat, and sat in his chair near the stove. Emma stirred in the crib. Caleb leaned over, slow and careful, and placed one of the wooden carvings Toby had made into her small hand. She closed her fingers around it. He didn't smile. Not exactly, but he didn't look away. And he didn't get up. The last frost of the season came without warning. It settled over the land one early morning in April, coating the fence posts in a thin silver sheen and freezing the edge of the trough. Caleb Wren stood on the porch with a mug in his hand, watching the cold rise off the ground like breath. The sky was clear, quiet. Inside the house, there was movement, soft footsteps, a clink of tin against the stove, the faint sound of children waking up. He could tell without looking that Martha was already up, that she'd stirred the fire and boiled water, and that Emma would soon be wrapped and bundled against her hip. He could picture Sadie pulling on her worn boots, Benji still dragging his blanket half asleep behind him, and Toby standing by the door, waiting for him with that look he always wore now, steady, ready, proud. The house had become something different. It was no longer about the walls or the land. It was about who kept returning to it every night. Later that morning, they sat at the table together. No one said much. They didn't need to. Martha set down a bowl of oats for each child. Caleb poured the coffee. The only sound came from Benji humming a song he'd made up the week before. At one point, Sadie looked up. "Are we going to stay here forever?" The question hung there a second. Martha looked toward Caleb, but she didn't answer. Caleb set down his mug. His voice was quiet but certain. "You already have." Toby looked over. "Even if folks in town don't like it." Caleb met his eyes. "They'll get over it." And that was that. They went to church the following Sunday. Caleb hadn't stepped into that building in over a decade. His suit was older than Toby and didn't quite fit his frame the way it used to. But he wore it anyway. Martha dressed the children in what was clean. Her own dress had been patched again at the sleeve. They walked into the chapel as one. Martha carrying Emma, Sadie at her side, Toby and Benji trailing just behind, and Caleb last, hat in hand. People looked. Of course they did. Some nodded. Some didn't. Reverend Walker gave a small pause when he saw them, then cleared his throat and welcomed the congregation as he always had. Caleb sat beside Martha, his limp worse than usual after the long walk, but he didn't shift or fidget. He didn't feel small. Not anymore. During the hymn, Emma cooed. Benji dropped the book. Sadie whispered the wrong words. And Caleb smiled, just a little, without thinking. Spring came slow that year. The land healed. Fences were mended. The coop was rebuilt. Caleb showed Toby how to spot snake tracks near the edge of the creek and how to trap for rabbits. Sadie planted marigolds around the porch. Benji got bit by the mule and didn't cry, just swore quietly and got back up. Martha started a garden, and Caleb found himself clearing more land beside her. They didn't talk much while they worked. Didn't need to. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, she stood beside him on the porch, arms crossed, wind in her hair. "You never asked me to stay," she said again. He didn't answer, but I did. He looked over, his hand brushing hers by accident. Or maybe not. "I reckon I couldn't be stopped you if I tried," he said. She laughed once. Not soft. Full. Alive. And in that sound, something settled. That night, Toby knocked on Caleb's door. The boy stood there with a small box in his hands. "What's that?" Caleb asked. Toby held it out. Inside, one small carving. It was rough but recognizable. A man, standing, with four smaller figures beside him. Caleb stared at it. "I didn't know what else to make," Toby said. Caleb cleared his throat and nodded. "It's good work. You can keep it, if you want." He didn't speak for a moment. "Then I do." Toby nodded, turned, and walked back down the hall without another word. Caleb stood there, holding the box in both hands. He didn't put it on the shelf. He kept it on the table. The sun came up early the next morning. Caleb was already outside, chopping kindling. The door creaked behind him. Martha stepped out with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of coffee in hand. "You're up early," she said. "Always am." She walked up beside him, looked out over the land. "You ever think about how it all happened?" she asked. "You waking up one day and finding 5 people in your barn?" Caleb didn't stop chopping. "I think about it all the time." And he lowered the axe, wiped his forehead. "And I don't think I'd change a damn thing."